citizen. Same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome everybody to the People-Powered Planet podcast, where each week we have exciting guests, not just talking about all the terrible problems of the world, which we're kind of drowning in, but instead uplifting views of how we can build a better world, how we the people can come together and create a people-powered planet. Today, we have a very, very special guest, an old friend of mine who I knew since the early 60s when he was involved with anti-war activities back then to prevent a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. He's the author of a book called Waging Peace, The Adventures of a Lifelong Activist. And he's the co-founder of World Beyond War, a world beyond war. And this is a global movement to actually build that future beyond war and making it a future where it's just as illegal to kill people outside countries as it is to kill them inside countries. Now, he actually has been waging peace since he met Martin Luther King at age 15. And he was in civil rights demonstrations. He was blocking nuclear weapons at Livermore Lab. He was helping to block the trains carrying shipments and munitions for fueling Central American wars. So he's waged peace actually in some of the most dangerous places in the world. He's the founder of the Global Peace Force. I mean, he's not just sitting here talking, we should have peace, and let's all be nonviolent with each other. He's actually got a force of people on the ground dealing with top conflict spots around the world, helping diffuse violence, helping to bring peace. Now this is a microcosm of the huge global peace force we need in the world, but it's a beginning, and they've waged peace in some of the most dangerous places in the world, from the Philippines, Iran, Kosovo, even in the Soviet Union. Now, David is a fellow Quaker. I remember him speaking at the Quaker meeting in house in Washington about the San Francisco to Moscow Peace March, an incredible walk to help prevent nuclear war. And so at a key time right now, when we're facing even much greater threats, when the Bolton of Atomic Scientists clock has moved us from 7 minutes, a proverbial 7 minutes, to a midnight of unparalleled destruction, the end of civilization, it's now 100 seconds. We stand on the edge of tyranny. The nuclear threat's actually gotten greater, even though people aren't talking about it. And, the threats of a destabilized world. So in this time when we face, real threats to the very existence of American democracy as we know it, we're going to talk to David about a very important subject. And that is, how can we let the massive public know a force more powerful than violence for dealing with this kind of threats? So let's start with David. David, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about how you see the power of nonviolence helping us in these dangerous times.
Well, good to see you again, Arthur, and it's good to be fellow world citizens working for a peaceful and just world over many decades. So as you mentioned, I met Martin Luther King back in 1956 when I was 15 years old, and seeing nonviolence in practice in the South made a great impact on me. And I've been working and trying to help in supporting and being involved in helping organize nonviolent struggles, nonviolent movements for peace and justice ever since. It just seems to me it's insane. It's not illegal. It's not only illegal, it is insane to be addicted to war and addicted to killing people as a way of trying to achieve security and resolve conflict. It's unfortunately, the U.S. and the world have been addicted to war for generations, and it's ever more stupid. Back in the First World War, I think over 90% of the people that were killed in wars were the soldiers. Now it's over 80% of the people that were killed in wars are civilians, are women and children, old people. And as Daniel Ellsberg points out in his new book, he says that if we have even a small nuclear war, we're going to end up with nuclear winter. And not only will billions of people be killed initially by that nuclear war, but essentially life on our planet will be over as a result of nuclear winter, because there'll be so much debris into the air that the sun will not be able to get through, and we cannot grow crops. We'll all be toast.
Yeah, now look, a key way for people to look at that so they really realize the power of that is that the meteor that hit Earth, that wiped out the dinosaurs, is estimated to have been between 8 and 10 miles in diameter. Now, how many dinosaurs could you kill, in an 8 to 10 mile area? But that threw so much soot into the air that it created that global warming that you're talking about, that greenhouse effect, that blocked out all the vegetation and ended the dinosaurs. So indeed, just a small nuclear war using a tiny percent, like for example, a war between India and Pakistan, or other so-called tactical nuclear war, is a threat to our existence on this of life on Earth. And that is why it's so urgent that people start learning not just the problem, but how can we begin to turn that around? What do you see as the solutions that can help us empower a shift?
Well, I think there is several solutions. One, you and I both consider ourselves world citizens, and I don't see myself so much as an American, or my friends that are Russians or from India or China or South Africa, as being, we're all. I consider we're all children of God. We're all citizens of the world, and especially in this age of potential nuclear war and pandemics like COVID-19, the borders will mean nothing when there's war. So we need to broaden our scope of who our family is. It's not just our immediate blood family or the people in the city where we live or the state where we live or the country. We're all citizens of the world. And I think we need to be concerned not only for our security, but for security of all people in the world. So that one is we need to change that whole mindset. A second is, as I said before, our addiction to war and violence as a way of resolving conflict. We are spending over half of every federal tax dollar that each of us pays to the federal government every year in the United States for wars and preparations for more wars, for, quote, better nuclear weapons, for the seven primarily Muslim countries that we're bombing around the world. The cost of war project, I think last week came out with a study showing that at least 39 million people were driven from their homes from the wars since 9/11. We as Americans were very upset that close to 3,000 American people got killed that day. But in response, we have fought wars every day since, and have driven over 39 million people from their homes. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, and it's cost over $6.4 trillion just for the US for those wars. Well, what we could have done with $6.4 trillion in terms of uh, improving not only the lives of every American person, a decent education for everybody, free medical care, free college education, making the transition to a renewable energy world so we're not threatened by global warming. And we could have helped make a decent life for every person on the planet. Now that's real security. It's not making ever more enemies. And even our military leaders have said, these wars are not making us safer. You know, every drone strike that kills, quote, a terrorist is also killing at least 10, 15, 20 civilians who had nothing to do with terrorism. And for each of those people, their families and friends will become enemies. So, I mean, that's the second. A third is the power of nonviolence. And Gandhi and Martin Luther King have pointed the way to an alternative to violence and war as a way of resolving conflict. And what I feel so empowered and excited about is that people all over the world are discovering the power of nonviolence and nonviolent movements as a way to resolve conflict. So all over the world, people, when their governments are either dictatorships or not listening to the people, are non-violently overthrowing those governments. And that's started with the Philippines. Well, it started with India, with Gandhi, but more recently in '86 with the Philippines, where they had a dictator that had been in power for decades. Just non-violently faced the tanks, you know, with their rosaries and the nuns bowing in front of the tanks. And Marcos, the dictator, had to leave the country within, I think it was about a week or 10 days of that. Millions of people out in the streets. Well, more recently, there's been so many examples all over Eastern Europe. The people, the U.S. had said for decades, the only way to defeat communism is by a massive military and by being prepared to engage in nuclear war. Well, the Berlin Wall fell, and the communist dictatorships all over Eastern Europe fell, not as a result of all the American billions, trillions of dollars we'd spent on war, but through the people non-violently saying, we're not going to take this anymore.
Absolutely. You know, a very powerful example of that. I went to Lithuania recently on a Rotary exchange trip, and we met with the first head of state of Lithuania, President Landsbergis, who led the singing revolution. This was the first country to break away from the Soviet Union. And I got to meet with him because Gary Davis, the one we talk about in our movie, The World is My Country, World Citizen #1, he had given Landsbergis a world passport 2 weeks after he declared independence from the Soviet Union. And Landsbergis told me that this passport was so important to him because once they declared independence, he could still travel with his old Soviet passport, but he didn't want to do that. I'm not a Soviet. I just said we're independent from that. So he was so glad to have the world passport. He said, so when I went to the border, I pushed them the world passport and they stamp it. So he thought that was so great. And you know, it was incredible because here was the mighty Soviet empire that had crushed resistance movement after resistance movement. Every even semi-violent resistance movement was crushed. But in Lithuania, they had a singing revolution. People were out there singing songs of freedom, you know, as you mentioned, they were doing rosary beads in Manila, but here they were singing songs of freedom. And when we went on our tour guide said, I was up on top of this building here telling people, okay, the tanks are coming down this street. And then everybody would rush to that street and block the tanks. They weren't running away from the tanks. They were going toward the tanks. And they were keeping the tanks from taking over their TV station, from taking over their parliament building. And they were doing the same kind of nonviolent thing we saw with that Chinese student who, before the whole world, stood in front of a tank. And they were using the appeal to the humanity of the driver of that tank with their bodies. And 17 of them were killed. 17 were run over by tanks. But 17 is a very small number compared to what would be lost in a much more unsuccessful violent revolution. So tell us a little bit more. How did these various movements learn about nonviolence? And how does that get taught to people?
There is a film called "The Force More Powerful," which is 6 stories of nonviolent people power making major change in history. And one is Gandhi in the Salt March in India. One was the civil rights movement in the United States, where the students nonviolently challenged segregation, went to jail all over the south of this country, risked their lives. I mean, some were actually killed. A third was the nonviolent resistance to Hitler and the Nazis in Denmark, where they saved over 90% of the Jews nonviolently from Hitler.
I understand in that story briefly that at one point the Soviets ordered the Soviets put up their flag, and the president said you have to take down that flag, and the Soviets of course said no. So any soldier takes down our flag, we'll shoot him. And the king said, I am that soldier. And so they couldn't shoot him when he took down the Soviet flag. So yeah, the power of nonviolence is pretty incredible. But carry on.
And a similar story, I think it was the king of Denmark, when the Jews were all ordered to wear the Star of David. The king decided, announced that he was going to be wearing the Star of David. Well, that's solidarity. We're all brothers and sisters. We're not going to allow people to be singled out for killing or discrimination. So the solidarity movement, where the people in Poland, that was really the example for all of Eastern Europe of how to resist the communist, the Soviet domination. The nonviolent overthrow of Pinochet, the dictator in Chile. And finally, the transformation of South Africa from an apartheid regime to a democratic society. So those films are available on the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict website. And people need to be inspired. There are examples of, they're positive examples of how to deal with oppression and governments that are misbehaving, that are not meeting the needs of the people. And there's Gene Sharp, who I know you know, but wrote a book called The Politics of Nonviolent Action, and wrote a book called Waging Nonviolence, which is, he talks about 20th century experience, 21st century potential. But he actually, in much more depth than this film, talks about all the examples of societies where people nonviolently overthrew those governments that were oppressing the people.
It's actually even more than just telling you what happened. It's actually the detailed manual on how, you actually have a detailed manual on how to do a nonviolent revolution, point by point, step by step. What are the factors and steps? And this has become a manual used by people around the world to bring down dictatorial governments. And it's something that, frighteningly could be important for us here, where we're now hearing that, we may have a president who refuses to step down, who takes a dictatorial power by manipulating the election, by having armed vigilantes trying to intimidate poll workers by saying, they're saying, well, we're protecting the poll by, keeping people who aren't authorized to vote, and just so many things that could lead up to incredible oppression right here, with far greater tools of oppression than Nazi Germany or the Soviets ever had. Total information control of knowing everything, where everybody moves and everything. We have all this great technology that served us, but it also, tracks us everywhere, and facial tracking, and so from satellites. So when we look at those threats, there will be people who will think, oh, this is terrible. We've got to have a revolution. How do we quiet those people who think they should have a revolution, when that's exactly what the forces of oppression want? They want somebody to, kick up violence so they can come down heavy.
Yeah.
How do we quell that, the people who are frustrated from thinking they could solve it with violence?
Well, first, before I try to respond to that, and just in terms of this present situation, there's increasing discussion by many people that even if the president in the White House loses the election, he may not be willing to leave the White House. He may not be willing to. He'll call it a fake election, or fraud. And so there is if people go to choose democracy.us, hundreds of thousands of people are signing that, and it's a declaration that if that happens, they will nonviolently resist, similar to what's happened in India and in Eastern Europe and the Philippines and Liberia and so many other places, South Africa. We will nonviolently say no more business as usual in the United States. Maybe hundreds of thousands of us will surround the White House day and night. Maybe people will be sitting in congressional offices saying to our congressmen, demand that the people be heard. But at any rate, and there will be trainings on the 23rd and the 30th of this month that George Lakey and Daniel Hunter will be leading. But anyway, that's choosedemocracy.us. I encourage people to take a look at that. So nonviolence is not just something to look at in history. It's what's happening right now. And I think, if I remember your question, I think in terms of governments, when they are dealing with people with guns or with looting, they know how to deal with that. They just shoot back. They put their knees on people and kill them. They just get more repressive, and they won't even allow then nonviolent demonstrations to happen. They consider everybody as part of the enemy. But if people engage in nonviolent struggle, as the people in the South did in the freedom movement, when Black people were not allowed to vote, when people would be hanged, people would be beaten up with billy clubs, people in the freedom rides where their buses were burned with people in it. Over and over and over again, the government was using violence to try to stop these movements. Well, when the people in Alabama were the Black people were trying to go and register to vote, and the police came and beat them down so they couldn't even enter the door of the courthouse to register to vote. The people just kept marching, even when the blood was running down their faces. And they kept doing that day after day after day, and essentially saying, you're not our enemy. We're all American citizens, and we're just demanding, that we really live our democracy. Well, that was on national television every night. And the people across this country, when they saw this, their hearts and their conscience were touched. And they decided, look, this is totally un-American, that Black American citizens are not allowed to vote. And they supported then the voting rights bill. So even though President Johnson had said to Martin Luther King, when King came back from getting the Nobel Peace Prize, Johnson had said, you know, we'll never get a voting rights bill in the next few years because, you know, we already have the civil rights bill, et cetera. Congress would never do this. Within 2 months of the Selma campaign, we had a voting rights bill because the conscience of America, of the American people, had been touched. And they then put pressure on their members of Congress to listen to them, not listen to the racists.
That's so important, that power of media being a part of it. And today, even though the force of oppression and of tracking us and everything are greater than ever, we also have greater power in our hands. You know, all the cell phone cameras that record misdoing, all the YouTube videos and so on. These are our tools for getting out the word and for touching people's consciousness and hearts. So that is so crucial.
There was a story in Guatemala where they had a horrendous dictator back in the 50s, early 50s. And there was just massive nonviolent demonstrations. And the dictator just kept mowing people down, killing them that resisted him. Well, that nonviolent movement grew and grew and grew. And finally, the story goes, his secretary was not willing to type out his orders. And he had to leave the country. Well, that's nonviolent power. And if in the United States, just as an example, if Trump refuses to leave and the people are treating the police and the military who have been ordered to kind of keep the peace, quote, keep the peace. But the people keep responding with treating these people as their brothers and sisters, as fellow American citizens who also want democracy. And then they refuse their orders to shoot at or to kill or to maim or imprison the people. Trump would lose his power and he would have to leave office. Mm-hmm. So I also wanted to point out a new book called A Global Security System, an Alternative to War. And World Beyond War has written this. And it lays out a positive vision of how, instead of spending over $1 trillion a year on wars and preparations for wars, and essentially making more and more enemies around the world, how the methods of diplomacy, the methods of negotiation and mediation of nonviolent peace forces, that instead of sending the Marines in if something terrible is happening in some part of the world, send some nonviolent peace teams to go and accompany the people that are being attacked. And this is happening all around the world already. So anyway, I highly encourage people. This is the 5th edition of this book. We've been improving it every year. And for people that, I mean, it really is an addiction. Just as I think there can be, alcohol can be addiction to millions of people. Our addiction to thinking that we can get security through killing, through threatening to put an end to life on our planet, through nuclear war. I mean, this is absolutely insane. It's immoral. I mean, we criticize, and rightly so, the Hitler and the Nazis for killing 6 million Jews. Well, that was terrible. But now we're threatening to kill every person on our planet through nuclear war. And why, and why could anyone ever justify for any reason putting an end to all human life on our planet? I mean, I mean, I can't quite get it, but each of us keeps paying over 50% of our federal taxes every year for these wars and preparations for wars, and say, no, we don't have enough money for decent education for every child. No, we don't have the money for masks to defend people from this pandemic. No, we don't have, we don't even have money for food stamps for hungry people in the United States. No, we don't have money for the United Nations to fight pandemics like COVID-19. No, we don't have money to make the transition to a renewable energy world where we will no longer have to fight wars for oil. So if the American people, like the people of India and like the people over Eastern Europe and the Philippines and Liberia and South Africa and Chile, were to say, we're not going to put up with this addiction to violence and war anymore. We are all citizens of our world, and we're going to demand that we commit ourselves to peaceful, nonviolent ways of resolving conflict, and putting those trillions of dollars that we're putting into wars and preparations for wars into meeting the needs of every human being on our planet, the human environmental needs. We could be the most secure nation in the world.
Mhm.
I mean, people would love the United States. What if instead of 800 military bases around the world, which are attacking people and dropping bombs on people, we were having hundreds of thousands of Peace Corps people out making friends? Well, and teaching in the schools, and feeding the hungry, and starting health clinics. Well, I mean, that's our choice. And we can either see ourselves as citizens of the world, and just as we care about people in our own immediate family, we care about each other all over the world. And if millions of children every day are dying of starvation, well, wouldn't that be a better way to spend our money to helping those kids than building better nuclear weapons so we could put an end to life on the planet? I mean, are we we're asleep at the wheel? Why are we allowing our government to continue this insanity when there are viable, peaceful alternatives to achieving peace and security and justice for every person on the planet?
Before we open to other questions, I do want you to say a little bit more, because you did mention that there are nonviolent peace forces active already around the world. What has been and what is the experience of the nonviolent peace force that you created?
Well, it was inspired by Peace Brigades International and Witness of Peace in the 1980s, when the U.S. supported Contras were attacking the Nicaraguan people across the border in Nicaragua, bombing child care centers and health co-ops and agricultural co-ops, etc. A group of Americans were down just visiting northern Nicaragua to see what was happening down there. And while they were there, the attack stopped. And they were there for 3 or 4 days. And the last night they were there, they thought, wow, we've got an amazing power here. The people here have been attacked day after day, night after night for weeks and months. And there's no attacks while we're here. So they started Witness for Peace, where for the next many years, there were American people coming down, both long-term people and people who would come down for 2 weeks and be in the war zones just to be present with those local Nicaraguan citizens. And it was an example. I mean, it was American people saying, these are our brothers and sisters. We're not going to allow this to happen. And through the power of nonviolent presence, uh, for whatever reason, the people that were on the other end of lobbing those bombs across the border did not do so. So, inspired by that example, and there's many more examples that I could mention, uh, people from around the world have started the Nonviolent Peace Force, which now has hundreds of people in conflict areas in different parts of the world accompanying civilians who are being threatened by warring parties. And sometimes it's the government, sometimes it's, the guerrillas on the other side, and sometimes it's both. But we have people presently in Myanmar, in Burma, in the southern Philippines, in Mindanao province. We have people in South Sudan. We have some people in Iraq, but who are actually accompanying civilians who are, as I said earlier, the victims of these wars. So as we saw in Central America, where we focused on protection of the local peacemakers and the local human rights workers who are threatened by the powers that be. If we can help make it safer for them to continue their work, we as outsiders, we can't be the people that know all the solutions, but we just by our presence, we can make it safer for them to continue their work. This is a very important contribution we can make. So even the United Nations is now discovering that unarmed, nonviolent civilian peacekeepers can often be much more effective than even armed peacekeepers or UN Blue Helmets. Different UN bodies, UNESCO, UNICEF, the UN agency working with refugees, are contributing some money to the Nonviolent Peace Force to do the work in war zones around the world. And I mean, our vision is that this could become thousands of people. And actually these peace teams are not just Americans, they're people from all parts of the world. So they're truly examples of the human family coming to the aid of others in the human family that are being inflicted with violence and death by death squads and by governments that are killing people. So, and I think the Secretary General of the UN actually talked about unarmed protection, or unarmed civilian protection is what they're calling it. So I think if those of us that are doing things like the Nonviolent Peace Force and the World Beyond War and people in the nonviolent movements around the world continue to show the power of nonviolent means to resolve conflict, I think this is contagious. And people, I mean, nobody loves war. Nobody loves to kill other people, but just because your government tells you that they're, the bad guys. I think people want to feel, loved and secure and feel we can be friends with each other. We don't have to kill each other. What mother would wants their children to go off and kill and be killed? What father wants their children to go off and kill and be killed? So if the people of the world wake up to the insanity and the horror of continued forever wars, and former President H.W. Bush, I guess it was, or just W. Bush, said, well, there's going to be forever wars. Well, let's prove him wrong. If
Right.
people refuse to fight in those wars, if people refuse to pay for the wars, if people refuse to be silent while their government uses their tax money to whether it's nuclear bombs or whether it's any kind of I mean, we're not only have these 800 military bases around the world, we're the largest exporter of weapons. And you may remember Trump showing off on television, here we were going to send, what was it, $100 billion of weapons to Saudi Arabia. And well, this is going to be good for the American economy. Well, is that the way we want to have a healthy economy? Is that we're going to be killing the people in Yemen, and you know that children will die of starvation because you know they can't get any food? I mean, is that? I don't think that's who we are as American people or people of our planet. We want to live in peace with each other, but we've got to wake up and say we're not going to put up with it. We're not going to cooperate with it. We're not going to go on with business as usual while our governments keep fighting these, you know, ridiculous wars.
Very good point. Well, now, before we throw it open to questions, can you just tell us if people want to be part of that nonviolent peace force, if they want to sign up for that, and or have friends or young people that would like to be a part of that, how do they do that? Where do they go?
Well, you can just Google. For a lot of people have computers, and I suppose that's the way people are watching this program. But just look up Nonviolent Peace Force. You can find out actually much more than I was able to say here, what they're doing in different parts of the world. And if you're interested in the possibility, I mean, I think we're recruiting people that really have some experience in peacekeeping and nonviolence. But take a look at that. Also, take a look at World Beyond War, where you can actually sign a declaration of peace that you want to, you commit yourself to working to nonviolently to end all war. And you can then see all kinds of great articles in this, order a copy of this book, A Global Security System. David Swant has written many books, including War is a Lie. And all wars are based on lies. As I said, people don't want to kill each other, and our governments have to lie to us to get us to kill each other, or get us to pay 50% of our taxes to kill our brothers and sisters that are on the other side of the world. Wow. But anyway, you'll see many good resources, articles, and join people in, I think it's over 180 countries around the world that have signed that pledge, the Declaration of Peace, and get actively involved. We've got active groups all over the world.
Yep. So go to worldbeyondwar.org. Well, let's throw it back to Melanie to take a few questions.
Yes, and David, I just want to say thank you for such a hopeful, beautifully stated, positive message about what we can do, because often people are like, it's too overwhelming, it's been this way forever, but we each make a difference, and being nonviolent is critical for our success, and sticking together. Reading your book, Waging Peace, thank you for all the work you're doing and have done. It's just incredible. So yes, we do have a question from Jerry Tettleman. Jerry, if you'd like to go ahead, please.
Thanks, Melanie. David, I just want to say I appreciate the work that you have been doing, and the idea of raising people's consciousness that war is a ridiculous option and that we live in a very dangerous world and deal with this immediately. I think that's something that there's too many people that accept militarization as normal, and it's certainly, we need to reject it. The question I have for you is about your future vision. And when I say your future vision, you know, I hear you talking a lot about the past and getting rid of war, but substituting, I'm a promoter of the idea of one world democracy, of a world federation. And I believe in the idea of substituting. The reason we have war is because we have anarchy. We don't have any law between countries, or we have relative anarchy. And I see places like the European Union where they have fought wars, 2 world wars, and fought for centuries, that now is at peace within the European Union because they have a system of law, a parliament. It's not a total federation, but they do have peace based on that. And I wanted to hear a little bit about your future vision as far as either reforming the UN or expanding the concept of the European Union, or uniting the democracies. I wanted to hear a little bit about that. If you could talk about a little bit about your future vision for substituting law for war.
Well, again, Jerry, this book, A Global Security System and Alternative War, does look at whether reforming the United Nations is possible, or whether we need to build a new global institution, which is really representing the world's peoples, not just their governments. I don't think we don't come down, this is right or that is right. But I mean, most governments, unfortunately, are still thinking in the my government, my government is right, those governments are bad. And we've got these little wars and we've got big wars. And I think ideally we would have some kind of an international institution representing the world's peoples. And where something like the question of, do we want a continuation of war? Well, the governments are going to say, well, yes, we have to defend ourselves. And many, many times when they say we, it's us privileged people that are running this government. And it's thinking very narrowly. It's not thinking of the millions of people whose sons and daughters will have to go off and fight and get killed, and bombing other people's villages, etc. So I see I see a change in consciousness where we're no longer so, I mean, the people, I live in San Francisco, the people in San Francisco are not against the people across the bay in Berkeley, or people in New York or in New Orleans or Atlanta, Georgia, or somewhere else. We see ourselves as American citizens. Why can't we expand that to we're world citizens, we're global citizens? And that's, as you mentioned, that's what's happened in Europe. I mean, they fought 2 world wars, bloody, bloody civil wars, and bombed each other's homes and villages and schools and hospitals. And now they wouldn't think of doing that because they all see themselves as, European citizens. Well, so that change of consciousness is necessary. I think second, then we need to change the institutions. And it's not just our American military domination of the world. It's economic, political, social, entertainment. All this is based on us first and us controlling things. Well, I mean, on a smaller scale, that's happening all around the world by different countries. We need to change the institutions, which are really going to reflect, that's the World Trade Organization and the UN and everything else, to really reflect what is going to benefit all the people of the world, not just our nation state. I don't know, but I encourage you to take a look at this global security system, alternatives to war, for much more in depth on that question.
So crucial what you're talking about the role of law. And it's interesting that the experience of Jim Crow in the American South that you started out with the lynchings and the burning schools and all these things, it's very interesting that when the people who wanted to create the apartheid system in South Africa got going, they actually studied the American South and how to do it. This is something Trevor Noah brought out. And in Germany, when Hitler was constructing his apartheid system and a system of what led to the concentration camps, he also studied the the techniques that had been developed there in the American South. And at the same time, it's so inspiring that it's we the people, with the group you were a part of with Martin Luther King and everyone else, that brought down that incredible apartheid state in the South. And that also became the example that the people in South Africa used to bring down the apartheid government and to put Nelson Mandela, who was in jail, into being the president. It was also what was studied by the people in Germany that brought down the Berlin Wall with huge people power and helped actually be a part of the crumbling of the Soviet Empire. So now it's so incredible that, you know, we Americans, we people in America, if we can bring out of the best in us, we can be incredible leaders to the world. So we can on the one hand lead in destruction, or we can be the leaders of creative new ways. And you know, one of the things that we learned from the experience in the American South is that there were three critical elements that made it possible to beat a system that was so incredibly oppressive. One was nonviolence. If people, when people were lynched, they went out and lynched a white person. When their church was burned, if they went out and burned a white church, I mean, that war could still be going on like it has in the Middle East forever, back and forth, killing more and more and more till we kill us all. But that power of nonviolence was a critical element. The second key critical element was media, was getting the story out. As you mentioned, it was that people saw that on national television that had that compelling thing. If it's all done in silence and we can't share it, you know, it doesn't work. The Berlin Wall came down, we all saw it on TV. In South Africa, people all over the world rallied to support that because they saw what was happening in apartheid. So the second key element is media. But the third key element is law. As you said, you worked to get this, you know, Johnson said we couldn't pass a voting rights law. It was passed. And when you had that law, then that could really make fundamental shifts, even in people who weren't touched by the nonviolence, even people who would never be moved by a feeling of empathy for the people who were killed. The law is what implemented the wishes of the people who felt the empathy. So we have to have that third crucial step, law. Now in the world, we don't have that crucial step right now. There is no world law. There's treaty law, which is deals between countries. And as we see, Trump is breaking these all the nuclear weapons treaties that help protect us. He's tearing them up.
The U.S. is going in the opposite direction. I mean, we developed the International Criminal Court, you know, some years ago, to make sure that all nations abided by, you know, human rights standards, et cetera. And now, when the International Criminal Court is looking at some of the things that the United States military has done in Afghanistan and Iraq, we are threatening those people that are part of that International Criminal Court. It's like, you know, you are the enemy for calling any American citizens to court. We have to abide by law, just as, I mean, most people in this country will abide by the speed limit, you know, because that's in everybody's interest. Well, we need to come to that same place where the human rights of every person is respected, and the treaties which have been painstakingly produced that are going to respect that are respected by all people. And I just remembered, Arthur, something you mentioned, Gene Sharp earlier, but his book, Dictatorship to Democracy, by the way, is the book that has become a handbook for people all over the world. And it's in many languages. I encourage people to take a look at that book, because it's a handbook of how we move from dictatorship and governments that are not listening to people to real democracy.
Thank you for that. We do have one more question from Jean Stevens. If you would like to go ahead and unmute yourself, we're almost out of time, but please go ahead.
So I wrote in the chat, do you have any ideas on how to get the peace groups and the environmental groups to unite under one organization or digital umbrella to ban the nukes? I
agree with you totally. And again, World Beyond War does have a bunch of articles and strategy suggestions on how the environmental movement and the peace movement can be working together. I'm actually working together with the Poor People's Campaign these days that is really bringing people in all these movements together. The people that are fighting poverty and injustice and racism and militarism and environmental destruction, the environmental movement, and women's movement, student movement, etc. I mean, as long as we keep fighting our individual little struggle, we're going to keep losing. But if we can realize that the source of all these problems is very similar, and we need to be working together, then I think as the people in Germany and the people in India and the people in South Africa, et cetera, discovered, together we've got, and if we can maintain a nonviolent spirit and in our actions and our movement, we can have tremendous power. So I support you entirely in saying we need to be working together. And I did see in the chat box, somebody asked how many of us have stocks in any of the companies that are making nuclear weapons and military. And there is a divest from war group that Code Pink and many other peace organizations are trying to encourage people and cities and universities and churches to really look at any investments that they may have that may be supporting making weapons of mass destruction or supporting war in any way, and to divest from that. If everybody divested from those companies and those corporations, they might begin to hear, wow, if we want to continue in business, maybe we better stop this nonsense.
Thank you so much, David. Incredible, phenomenal, and so hopeful too. So I appreciate that so much.
I think people need hope. And I share stories from the last 60 years of using nonviolent means to try to challenge oppressive governments and structures and the power of nonviolence. And I think we need to hear those stories. So
I love that picture of you on the cover with the flower in front of the police.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the best way to fight the police, is not with guns or fist fights, but with flowers.
Excellent, excellent. Well, do get Waging Peace, and let's all wage it together. This is the most powerful force in the world, and it's the reason why they've done all these apartheids and separations is that's how they have their strength. Because when we're all divided and separated, when we come together, we the people actually are the superpower that can save our world. So let's join us every week here on the People Powered Planet podcast, where we continue to talk to more exciting guests. We're so excited by David. David, you're just extraordinary. What a great speaker for putting this all together and understanding not only the problem, but powerful solutions that can turn it around. Ones that are counterintuitive, you want to respond with anger. They're doing this, I want to do that. But if you can find that way to center it and get that higher power and call on that higher power to face this horrible violence non-violently, and that takes a hell of a lot of guts, a lot more guts than fighting back and shooting. If you can find that guts, we can really make a difference, folks. So join us. Next week, we're having another extraordinary guest. If you go to the worldismycountry.com/club and just go down to the bottom and sign up. You can sign up for a free trial, or you can sign up for ongoing subscription with the first 2 months free. But we really do need your support to carry this on and to carry on the getting out this incredible film, The World Is My Country, which so makes the case for world law and really gives the key to how we the people can be instrumental in creating a new kind of world law that is not government over, that oppresses from above, but governance from the bottom up that implements a world of law without guns, bombs, but with the power of the people. So join us next week where we have another incredible guest, and that is we're having Robert De Laurentiis, who flew a plane around, as a plane called Citizen of the World. And he flew it. It was a record-breaking trip that went from pole to pole. People have flown around these continents the other way, but his pole-to-pole route was so much more dangerous, a groundbreaking, death-defying trip, but touching down all along the way to touch people's hearts with the message of being citizens of one world. So join us next week as we hear his incredible story, watch a little bit of his amazing flight, and we'll continue to have some incredible guests after that. So join us for that. And I think for a finale, since we're talking about Citizen of the World, maybe I could ask David and Melanie to join us in just sharing and I think I am the world is my country shirts. There we are. Hey, David, there's Melanie. So the world is our country, folks. And once we realize that the world is our country, we have incredible power to change it. So join us this week and every week for the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.